business program. Well, I had the privilege, by being involved with that organization, one evening to bring onto campus. I went down to Amherst and met the gentleman there, and I was supposed to escort him into the student union over there, and he was supposed to give us a talk. We had a program that was called the Distinguished Visiting Program. And you may have seen, if you were paying attention to some of the slides, that one of the people that was sitting there with a bunch of students was Eleanor Roosevelt. She came here, and it was a similar circumstance. In my case, the person I was supposed to escort was the poet Robert Frost. So I went down to Amherst. He was staying at Lord Jeffrey, picked him up in a limousine, and we brought him here. Well, several years before that, I had taken some courses. I was an English major. I usually say English literature because it makes you sound like you're chasing verbs or adverbs or something like that. But really, I enjoyed reading the classics and things like that. And I had taken a course where we discussed the poetry of Robert Frost. And the professor at the time, when we talked about a poem that was called Mending Fences. Okay, you might remember the line that says, good fences make good neighbors. Well, actually, Frost was very caustic. He was mocking the person who was saying that. He didn't believe that. Anyway, the professor that I had said that in this thing it talks about some dark stuff. Who was this force that had thrown these big stones across the normal stone fences that we see here in New England? And who was this dark, that didn't like fences? And the professor said, well, what he was trying to apply was this was global nuclear warfare. And I said, I don't know, but here am I, lonely student. Here's a PhD guy telling me that's what it is. But I had this opportunity as we were coming onto the campus to ask Mr. Frost. I said, Mr. Frost, did you, when you poem Mending Fences, were you implying that this was nuclear holocaust that we were facing, this dark thing? And he looked at me, and I could tell from his expression and everything else, he had very twinkling eyes, I might admit. And he said, well, if that's what your professor thought, if he read that into it, well, it was in there for him. Well, that vindicated what I had thought for a couple of years, that this guy, the professor, was really off base. But I took Mr. Frost, and I remember I took him into the student union, and we went in, and it was all these people assembled. I stood in the edge of the wings, if you will, and I watched him read a number of his, well, he didn't read it, he recited a number of his poetry. And it was absolutely amazing. I mean, he had no notes. Obviously, he had memorized it. I mean, he wrote the things. But the cadence that he taught was exactly the way it should have been. And I mean, he had the audience eating out of his hand. And it was this wonderful experience. And I look back on that, even today, and for a couple of reasons. One was, it was really an epiphany for me, because I said to myself, well, here I am, the PhD guy is telling me this is the way it's supposed to be, and I didn't quite buy that. And then I had the case when it was vindicated by Mr. Frost himself, and what he said is the way he spoke and everything else, and his body language, that wasn't the case. And that made me realize at that time that I was educated enough to not accept what somebody told me as gospel. That I had to think for myself, reason it out, and I said, I looked back at it over the years. I said that was the moment when I became what's supposed to be liberally educated, where you think for yourself, you have reason, etc., and you don't buy everything that somebody tells you just because they tell you. And as a result of that experience, I kept the poems of Robert Frost. I had a book that just fell apart a couple of years ago, and I rebought it and all that. And I think it was a real life-changing experience for me, at the University of Massachusetts from that distinguished business program.